is The Boys, the Watchmen-like deconstruction of superheroes we've been waiting for in movies and TV. And sometimes the shows based on those comics and graphic novels. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask, and yes, Todd, it is one of those shows episodes again.
Yeah.
And it's been a hot second. I mean, we haven't done a shows episode for a little while. I mean, not counting our Game of Thrones podcast, which has concluded more or less.
That's true, and we've also been beset with technical issues for the past, it seems like, a month, but it's really only been like 2 weeks.
Well, and if you're listening and you're wondering if anything sounds different or weird for whatever reason, we are recording via Skype, which, once upon a time, Skype had, no capability to record, and people who podcasted you'd have to download like 18 different, unrelated plugins or apps and daisy chain all this nonsense together to maybe record something, maybe. Well, at some point during all that, Google Hangouts made it super duper easy to just record your podcasts straight to YouTube, download them, they're archived there, you can do whatever you want, and it was wonderful. Well, Google has decided to just do away with all that, and we were kind of in the wilderness, I guess, for a good week or two or three, and we did, in the process of all that, we've discovered Skype actually makes recording super duper duper easy now without any additional stuff. So that's where we are, back to Skype.
We really missed our window to have the definitive how to do a remote podcast, because at one point we had the YouTube Hangouts situation dialed in so well. Yeah. And even when we were doing Wednesday in Westeros with our guest host Emily Kelly Cunin, we just would have her hang out with us on that, and we could all use proper studio microphones, and it didn't sound like a phone call, and it was great. And I told a couple of people, we should have done an episode on this, is what I'm saying, because I told a couple of people how we did it, and how easy this had been. Because whenever I would gripe about some technical situation, everyone would go, well, have you tried Skype with the whatever, plugin? Have you tried blah, blah? And it was like, yeah, we tried all of that. Listen to our first 5 or 6 episodes. And where that audio is terrible, and we were recording separate tracks, and then I'm trying to sync it up later, and we would have that thing where one of us the whole recording would get lost. Oh my God, what a disaster! And then we had it so good.
I forget that those episodes were sort of wonky like that. I need to go back and revisit. That's
we had it so good for like 2 years, and then Google throws us this curveball, which we were bitching about before we hit record today. So
you guys get to hear it. You listeners at home get to hear behind the scenes how the sausage is made, or in this case hasn't been made for several weeks. So we're back, and in somewhere in the interim of all that, we both watched the new Amazon series The Boys, and decided this was the right time to chat about it. So this is a boys themed episode.
Yeah, so I'll start off by asking you, not the question I told you I would ask you, but have you heard chatter from other friends about this show?
Yeah, and everybody has kind of come to it at different times. It's not like Stranger Things 3, where it's like everybody watches it immediately. It's like, oh my God, like you all come out of the same movie theater together, you and the rest of the world at once. Yeah. Which is kind of fun. But no, this is a little different. I think Amazon didn't promote it nearly as aggressively as Bosch or any of the other things it promote. I mean, good Lord, you can't escape Bosch on Amazon. You do anything, and Bosch is there hanging out with you. I've still never watched it. But The Boys is
it's a cooking show, right?
Yeah, that's my understanding. That great cooking show, Bosch. Amazon.
Gordon Ramsay is Bosch.
Yeah,
it's like Kitchen Bosch.
It's like the format of like a 70s cop show. Gordon Ramsay is Bosch. There he is.
And you hit on something that may be exactly what was bothering me about this, was that I've, asked everyone, if they've watched it, and I'm getting a lot of and then nothing else. But maybe the reason for that is in mixed like in mixed groups. I don't know why I used the adjective mixed there, but in groups, it's sporadic who has yet seen it. So maybe we're all just being careful about what we say.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I would gather
you're right,
that's
people are coming to it
correct.
at different times. But it was heavily promoted at Comic-Con. So like when I came away from Comic-Con, it was very much on my mind, you know?
Okay.
So that's interesting to also to hear like from the, you know, the people that didn't see it on every, you know, billboard and street sign for a week.
Yeah. Well, and it's like once I've encountered somebody who has seen it, reaction's largely the same. It's just like, oh my God, it's so bewildering, and it's kind of the same reaction I had. It reminds me of what I felt like when I first came out of Kingsman 1. You know, I reference that movie all the damn time on the show, but that moment of walking into that little movie theater in Whistler, BC. Like I was like, what have I just witnessed? What was that delightful thing that I never expected to be so interesting and inventive and cool? And that's kind of what The Boys felt like. You know, some of it was, if it in a post Kingsman world, if you will, like some of it felt a little like, oh yeah, well that's not as shocking as it would otherwise be, but it's still
right.
It went in some pretty daring places that I mean, even in the first 10 minutes of episode 1, for God's sake, it's just like, oh wow, that's what they're doing. All right, so I think that's permeates a lot of people who watch it in terms of triangulating who else is with you.
For sure. There's a pretty obvious answer to this question, but what was the moment that you were put on notice like, oh, this is not like something I've seen before in The Boys?
I would say it was definitely delivered when Robin died.
Yeah.
And I would say though, but even beyond that, I think there was probably a more seminal moment, because that was like, oh man, that could have just been like a shock and tension grabbing sort of hijink. But what really sort of established my trust like firmly, I would think, oh man, maybe the scene where Billy Butcher's got the baby and he's whipping it around and it just laser eyes are going. Probably that, where I'm just like, oh, that's what. And by the way, folks, spoilers for The Boys. If you haven't watched it all the way through, we're not going to go episode by episode. Certain things we won't reveal just for conveniency, but we're going to talk about it to a degree that is probably going to be very spoilery, I would imagine.
Well, yeah. I mean, we could maybe try to hang that stuff off till the end and give a bigger warning.
Yeah.
There's a laser baby though. You already know.
There's a laser baby, which, you know, even if you know it's coming, it's 10 times more delightful. It doesn't matter. It's
oh yeah. Well,
one of those things.
There were definitely moments like that. Maybe not in every single episode, but there was sort of a moment where, you know, I just felt like just as you're sort of getting used to the craziness, something else would happen, and you're like, whoa, you know, like that's a lot of blood or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. I think Robin's death, especially coming so soon, and especially because the intro to it, I actually expected to be kind of like a dark hero moment, and so when the intro was really, you know, a hero being heroic, like in the superhero way that we understand, then it was like, oh, okay, maybe they're just sort of gritty or mean or something. You know, I still didn't really know where the tone was going to fall, and then that death was just like, you know, shocking, like just blew my mind.
Well, and then shortly thereafter, you get to see what happens with that. I forget, is it Sunfire? What's her name? The new.
Oh gosh, I can't even remember.
It's Sunfire. We'll just call her Sunfire. I'll look it up at the same time. But no, when she encounters the Deep for the first time and basically gets assaulted.
Oh my god.
That was when I was like, oh, this is going dark and soon. And so then it was a matter of, you know, kind of juxtaposing this with, of course, you know, books like Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns. And you're wondering, like, now, are they going dark in a meaningful way, or is this just all for sort of shock and awe value? Because I think that Deadpool has set a new bar. And it was nice to see them. I mean, the jury's still out, but I kind of feel like those moments of shock and awe were used very effectively in the greater scheme of things. I feel like.
I mean, it definitely walked a line. Starlight is her name, by the way.
Starlight.
And there was, you know, if the death of Robin sort of put me on notice, then the assault of Starlight, which was like, it was so clearly going to be an assault, and then they just kind of like averted the camera, you know, basically like left it where there was a little ambiguity until there's that scene later with her. and you realize what's happened, and I don't know, that was just such a, like, it was a punch in the gut, and I don't know that this makes sense, but I think the way they characterized the Deep later sort of certainly didn't, like, make it okay, but like really put it in I don't know, not in any way justified him, but just made it like his character develops in such a weird, fucked up way.
Yeah, he's not just a bro asshole who just does this. He's got a way deeper pathos that's more complicated than we could imagine.
And it's weird. It's not like not like a psychological explanation to, like, justify his actions or something. It's like, oh, this is a superhero that's, like, fucked up because he can talk to fish and he has gills. Like, that's a weird thing. And, you know, I don't know. That was although it's played, I think, it comes out as like a sort of unreality moment. I actually felt like, you know, you would probably be a weirdo if those were your powers. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, totally. It's an interesting juxtaposition too to, like, you know, we just saw an Aquaman movie not that long ago where Aquaman was basically this sort of, you know, immortal, luckiest guy in the world kind of character where just everything goes his way. Like, everything's awesome. And here's, like, the Deep going, oh no, there's a pathos to it that this sort of tortured soul underneath. Not that it excuses his behavior, but just like, you know, he's a lot deeper than that, Todd. Back to you.
Well, I'll get to the question that we opened the show with, which is, do you think The Boys is sort of that Watchmen-like deconstruction of superheroes that we've been waiting for in, you know, movies and TV?
This is an interesting question.
Is it is this the post-Marvel direction?
Ooh, that's an interesting context to it. So I have been wondering for a while now, given this sort of brash of adaptations of comic properties, if we wouldn't have a Watchmen-like moment that stopped the progress in its tracks and asked very important questions about, you know, what are these people supposed to, like, Watchmen did a lot of things. It's like, hey, look, we need to really think about these people in an interesting new way, and we're going to do it through this kind of complex storyline, but also complex, like the way they use the comics medium to tell the story. Like, everything about it was sort of a transitory moment where nothing quite was the same afterwards. It really everyone filtered all their new works through that lens to some degree, and still do. And there's been other works since then that have, you know, done similar things in the comics world, but we haven't had that quite in the movies and TV verses yet. And the Watchmen movie certainly was not that, because that was, good Lord, 2009. Like, the movement had, you know, the modern day renaissance of all these adaptations hadn't even really begun yet. It, you know, maybe a year in at most. So that wasn't it, which is kind of unfortunate, because it would have been cool to see that maybe happen around now when it was, I think, more appropriate. And so it didn't. The Boys did. I think The Boys fills that gap. I think it does.
Are you saying that, like, specifically because of the Watchmen TV show coming out?
No, because the Watchmen TV show, it still might do that too, but I think The Boys is kind of just like The Dark Knight Returns and all these other books that came along later, sort of, cause us to stop and think about the comics medium. The Watchmen was kind of the first one that really did in that way, and I think The Boys is going to be that for the TV movie adaptation stuff. Ironically, the Watchmen TV show is coming second. I mean, if The Boys hadn't happened, maybe the Watchmen TV show would have been that too. I don't know, but now it will be like, the next thing that might be just as relevant, but it will still not be the first thing, which is The Boys. And so and when you think about what The Boys tries to do, it's not like Amazon just bought some random comic and was like, we're in comics too. Look, it's like they tried to make a statement like, look, this can be, we're going to adapt stuff, but this can be so much more interesting and sort of layered if you think, if we're not afraid to go there, which was kind of a cool move. I don't know. I think it fills that gap. It does the right sort of, it addresses all the pathos and pathologies and just personality flaws and issues that people with these abilities would have, and then how corporate America would react against it. And I think in this, you take the fact that the medium of comics has been adapted to movies and TV shows now for 10 plus years, and then we're sort of living in probably one of the most vain, narcissistic times of the last 100 years. and it just sort of all fits together in this wonderful commentary piece about like vain pop culture commoditized to any extent is going to yield this kind of thing. It just hit all that for me when I really started thinking about it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when I was watching it, I was definitely thinking about the moment that it was coming out, sort of culturally and politically. But now, as we're chatting about it in the context of other superhero movies, and I had to refresh my memory, like you had said, Watchmen was 2009, and I know we've done this before, where we're like, wait, was Iron Man 1 the year before? And it was.
Yep. Oh, wait.
So we already had Iron Man when Watchmen came out, and we had Batman Begins in 2005.
Yeah.
Which was another like crazy kind of milestone in superhero telling,
Yeah.
But as we're talking about all this kind of stuff, what comes to mind for me is what a distinct series this is when we look at like what's been going on with Marvel and DC series, and especially the Marvel ones on Netflix, where I think we did get what you're describing, that like a lot of that human pathos and stuff. But as you and I have griped like about several of those shows, like just not told at the right rhythm and pace, No. And I mean, we saw it in Jessica Jones, and we saw it in Luke Cage and Defenders and Iron Fist. Like, and I know you. I think you caught up on Daredevil, right? Or
I haven't really watched past season 1. I've Wikipedia'd the rest, but those are shows. Those are shows that where it's, and I think we may have touched on this before, those are shows where the problems take center stage and the powers are just sort of there by convenience. It's like they don't, the power, you take the powers out of most of those shows. Jessica Jones is still a story about this woman who was emotionally manipulated and just beaten by this guy. And just the fact that he can control your mind that's almost like a bonus. It's like that you could take that out and the story would more or less be the same. Whereas I think The Boys, you have to have the powers. The superhero.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Has to exist in that way for it to really to really sort of fit that Watchmen commentary role.
God, you are so right on that. Like that is because like Luke Cage is at its heart like just about a guy that defends the neighborhood, Yeah. And he could just be a vigilante in a hoodie without his powers. I mean, they certainly add to the story, but wow, now it's making me think, like, is that like truly the Marvel perception of power, like the Marvel perspective on powers is?
Well, be careful, because those Netflix shows were sort of a separate thing from the Feige Marvel.
Well, True. I mean more in the comics legacy of the heroes with the feet of clay kind of way that it's often been described, and I sure think those shows were trying their best to fit into that legacy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that makes me really think of that. So back to the Watchmen TV show, though, is that something that you were anticipating at all, or did you not really care about it?
I think it's interesting. Anytime you attach Damon Lindelof to anything, one has to be suspicious. So there's always that sort of lurking in the background. But seeing Jeremy Irons cast as an older Ozymandias, seeing kind of what they're up to and the aesthetic of what they're like, the look of it is just it's TV, but it feels kind of retro and clean, and I don't know, there's something about it really looks good. So I was anticipating for that, but I wasn't looking for it to be sort of this, like, this is going to be the true commentary on it. Like I didn't think it was going to do that.
Right. Well, I mean, I definitely feel, when I was watching The Boys, I definitely felt like, wow, Amazon hustled to beat Watchmen to the punch with this.
Yeah.
And so I wonder how that changes our anticipation for it, because I know when the first TikTok Watchmen promo came out, when I did not know that Don Johnson was in it, I was like on alert, like, oh, this is kind of interesting. What's happening here? Yeah. The subsequent trailers haven't really piqued my interest as much. I mean, not that I think anything bad of them, just, I haven't had another of those moments where I'm like, oh, what? But The Boys definitely, I think, a little bit poison the well kind of thing, like I'm sort of like, well, I kind of got what I was looking for, but let's dig into that, because I mean, and this, I would say, from here on out, spoilers abound, because there's no way we can talk about these heroes without talking about the things that they've done. And one thing that you and I chatted about after we both watched it was just the the clear parallel between every hero and a DC or Marvel superhero, and mostly, and I think DC actually. Like this is the Justice League. This is Justice League, the Dark Universe or whatever that Snyder was trying so hard to make.
Yeah.
So we've got Homelander, who is the sort of patriotic bully that the Superman figure. What did you really think of him?
I thought it was interesting that they were trying to kind of combine Captain America and Superman into one. Character. Now, let me be clear too. I have never read the comic or graphic novel this is adapted from.
Right, so and neither have I.
And I didn't have any of that context, so I'm sure I would be looking at this through a very different lens if I had. So I'm actually interested in maybe going back to revisit the trade, or I forget how many volumes there are. I think there's 3. I'd be willing to do that, but at this point, man, I almost don't want anything to spoil my perception of it now in this format. So we'll see. Yeah. But Homelander was, at first when he first appeared, I'm just like, oh, what a bog standard, hybrid of Superman, Captain America, and just sort of emphasizing the Boy Scout nature of all those things. And then once you started to realize what they were doing, where it's like, yeah, it's Superman, but behind the scenes, he's basically Hannibal Lecter. Like that was sort of a cool, like that's when I really started to perk up, and I'm like, oh man, this because the actor they cast to play him, I'm like, why couldn't this have been Mark Paul Gosselaar?
Oh my God, I so thought it was.
Yeah, right. For the first 5 minutes, everybody's. Yeah. I wonder if there was a spike in Google searches. Is Zach Morris in The Boys? And you would have found out. But I'm like this, and then I'm like, when I found out it was, I'm like, well, they should have cast him because that would have been even more amazing. But then once I saw where they were going, I'm like, oh, this is requiring a sort of a deeper level of disturbed acting that guy brought. I thought.
Yes, and there's such a weird feint or fake in the telling of it, because Butcher, who is our protagonist, I would say, is and oh my God, now I can't remember the kid's name.
Jack Quaid.
Yeah, but what's the character's name?
Oh man, you would have to ask me that.
But anyway, Lil Quaid. What's funny is when I Googled him, I was like, God, that looks like Dennis Quaid. When I Googled him, what showed up on the snippet on Google was Uncle Randy Quaid, and I was like, well, that's not the lead I was expecting on Jack Quaid.
So by the way, Jack, he played Huey. That was the
Huey, yeah.
And also, real quick, Jack Quaid was one. I think he was Marvel in the original Hunger Games movie. One of the District 1 or 2 tributes. So if you're like, well, this kid looks kind of familiar, that's probably where you saw him. Anyway, continue.
So, Butcher tells Huey at one point, Homelander's clean. We got nothing on him. And it's in the first or second episode. But you learn later, of course, Butcher knows that's not true. And so there's this weird, fake out kind of thing that happens 3 times to Homelander's character. Because, when he said that, I was like, oh, now does he not know? What are we going to see Homelander do? Because I'm sure he's going to do something awful. And then does Butcher not know about it? And then you realize, no, Butcher knew about it. Butcher knew he was terrible. And then there's a fake that we'll get to at the end, or not a fake, but there's a little twist, and you're like, well, now what the hell do we believe? It was very, very confusing. But you said you like the combination of Superman and Captain America. What I kept thinking of was Frank Miller's Superman.
Totally.
Dark Knight Returns, yeah.
100%.
Just the
loyal till the end.
Yeah, and the state superhero kind of thing. This is the superhero of the state. I really liked the setup of the corporation that was funding it. Finally, and I know I didn't dig too deep into this, but I thought finally the economics of being a superhero makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because nothing about Spider-Man's economics makes sense. Only in the MCU where he's connected with Iron Man do they make sense. But in the comic book where he's a photographer who has all these this suit that obviously keeps getting destroyed, and these web spinners and all that kind of stuff. Where does he get the money for this? How does he have time to do this? I can barely work one job and keep my house clean. At least
they rectify that. They rectify that to some extent when he's got Tony Stark as his.
Oh yeah,
sugar daddy.
Exactly. Yeah. For sure, but this one, but in The Boys, with the corporation that is basically licensing them and assembling their PR for them, like they'll find out where a crime is happening, and it's like, well, who needs the coverage right now? That's who we're sitting on this one, and they also seem to stage them somewhat so that they can be in the right place at the right time, but. What was your takeaway from that? I mean, were you as curious about that as I was?
The corporation's relationship with the whole thing, or how they sort of move. It's interesting that they try to segregate the sort of all the helper worker bees away from the heroes themselves. Like there was sort of a weird, like, you guys aren't supposed to be in here. I'm like, wait, why not? Why aren't they supposed to be in there? Like, why are you guys keeping them cordoned off? That seems strange. And so it just that just felt very corporate to me. Like, well, of course, like they, it's like that's how they set up Theranos, for God's sake. It's like the marketing people in the lab are never supposed to talk.
Oh,
and that just sort of had that kind of feel to it. And even with
just blew my mind.
Even the way
Elizabeth Shue looks like
she plays that character in such a way. She plays that character in such a way. I'm not saying she was just aping. What's the Theranos lady's name? The hell's her name?
I know.
Banished it from my brain. I've deleted it. Irrelevant.
I'm just calling her
Elizabeth Holmes. Yeah. Shue and Holmes, the attorneys at law. No, Holmes, like she wasn't ripping that off. But I wouldn't be surprised if she hadn't watched that documentary shortly before they started filming scenes, and she's just like, I'm gonna give it a little bit of a Holmes twist, just a little bit of a sort of like just this sort of this reality distortion field kind of quality to. There's several scenes where I'm like, you don't understand what you're into here. Like it's just not processing what's going on. And I think that makes Homelander an even more interesting character when you start to dissect his relationship with her.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, I think.
There was one crazy scene in there.
There were a couple crazy scenes with those two, but there's one, and can we jump? We had another note in here, but let's just jump to it now because it's going to be impossible to continue without saying it.
Yeah.
I had written you shortly after watching the following question: Is Elizabeth Shue secretly an immortal Amazon queen, come back to the world of man after a long hiatus? Yes or no? Because I never even knew she was going to be. I mean, at no time did I know she was in the show. She never appeared in any of the promo materials. And so you're starting to watch. You're like, wait, Elizabeth Shue? And then about maybe 2 or 3 minutes pass, and you're like, wait, she looks amazing. How old? Like, this is her Jessica Lange kind of moment. Remember when Jessica Lange appeared in that first American Horror Story season, and everybody's like, holy crap, Jessica Lange. Like, how old is she? She looks amazing. Like, Elizabeth Shue kind of has the same. She's kind of having the same Keanu-sans, to some degree. Where has she been? Oh my God, we've missed you, Elizabeth. Like, and she, the fact that they asked her to do a lot of interesting things, and she was completely she said yes and committed to all those things. I mean, Jesus Christ, like this, she was one of the gems of this show, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I was actually when I went back to my text because I'm pretty sure as I was watching it, I had a friend who had binged it, the weekend before. So as I was watching it, I kept texting him as every new sort of surprise happened, and I texted him almost the same thing about Elizabeth Shue because I was the same thing. Like, I didn't know she was in it, and then she appeared, and it was like, oh, just. You're such a treasure, and you've shown up at just the right time.
She clearly goes to the same yoga studio as Michelle Pfeiffer and Julianne Moore, and all those actresses in their 50s who you're just like, how the hell are you? Like, you're almost like de-aging as you go. It's like, what's going on? It's very interesting.
Yeah, I just thought everything about her character was so great, and she was the perfect casting for it.
Perfect casting.
Just the right age. And
she wasn't creating like a caricature. She wasn't like, I'm the evil CEO. It was
right.
It was very natural and organic. Like, it was like, wow, I could see this woman could exist in this world. Like, I could totally see this. I have worked sort of with people like this before they hit that rung of the ladder. And I'm like, man, she got it. She knows exactly what that character is supposed to be.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But then let's take that back. So she and Homelander have this crazy complicated relationship, and I still haven't quite figured out this may have been answered, and maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, or I'd stepped out to the bathroom or something. Is Elizabeth Shue's baby? Who's the father? Like the character's baby? I forget what her character's name is. Who's the father of that baby? That may or may not be dead.
I wish you hadn't asked me that, because I was going to ask you that.
Oh,
with the same reason. Like it was. I mean, it was pretty clearly hinted at that it was Homelander, right?
I don't know if it was clearly hinted, but that's what I was starting to pick up on. She's fooled around with him in the past to like sort of keep him in line, and she had this kid with him, but that makes the ending even more ridiculous, because it's like, well, wait, how often has he done this? So I don't know, but like, then what's the deal with he and her? Like, she acts like, and then I thought for a second, like, well, maybe she's his mom, and then they put him through some kind of rapid growth program or something. I don't. It was a weird relationship.
Yeah, I mean, when he is suckling at her breast, I mean, there's no way to say it.
It's weird.
It was. There was definitely like this, and you know what my mind went to was like, because don't we learn later that like Homelander was just so very aware that he was raised in the lab, and yeah. So you know, I was like, okay, now we're dealing with the Homelander, like his attachment issues, because he never, had that.
And she's exploiting it, basically.
Or was she the one that was always there to like nurse him and literally take care of him? That's what I kept wondering. Like,
oh man, that, and maybe they'll explore that in hope. I mean, again, I haven't read the comic. Maybe everybody knows the answer to that already. I don't know. Hopefully they'll explore it more. But it's like that just makes him much more complicated. Like, he is a layered onion, more so than the Deep. The Deep's got some problems too, but man, Homelanders just keep going because he masks it so well. Like when they got to the plane and like the plane scene happened, I'm just like, oh my god! And he did it with such like sort of just nonchalance, just like corporate, like it was almost like a corporate, like, middle manager going to just effortlessly fire an entire department, just like, yeah, you guys go home, you're fired, and just like do it so dispassionately. Like that's how that felt. It's just, and then Maeve is there to sort of act as our avatar, like, no, you got to save somebody. He's like, no, we can't do that. He just flies off.
Yeah, man.
That was talk about a moment where you're like, oh, that's what the show is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There's there's no better time to bring this up, I guess. But what I did read, like you, I did not read the comic, but after I'd watched the entire series, I did jump into one of those spoiler articles about how it differed from the comics. Mm-hmm. And I didn't dig too much into Madeline. That's Elizabeth Shue's character until we're recording this podcast, and then I looked it up and found out she was gender swapped from the there was a man in the comics that was the assistant to the CEO of Vought International or whatever. So I just didn't retain anything else from reading that, so I don't know how that works with the baby, or if there's even a baby, or if that was just for the show or whatever. But what was really significant about this article I read after it finished was that what the show did, which kind of smartly sets up season 2, but also let me come at this another way. The show and comic book could be accused of fridging, which is that sort of like lazy writing thing where the men are only motivated by the death of their female partner. Uh-huh. So we see that with Huey. I mean, this is a Green Lantern thing. Like Green Lantern came home and found his wife in the fridge or something like that in a comic book. So, and Butcher is motivated by the rape and death of his wife. In the comics, the baby did rip out of her, but in the show they changed that ending. So that flip at the end is a change from the comics.
I love that flip so much.
Yeah, and so the article I was reading was like, actually, this does such a more interesting way of like getting to Butcher's motivation for this. Like now he's led this whole cause, which was certainly like justified because of the other crimes that the Supes were doing, but it was a cause of vengeance, like personal vengeance for him, and that was not true, So it's like this really weird twist on like motivation and Like, I mean, that ending, that was another of those moments where I was like, what the fuck? And then when it
Oh
just
man, I was
ended, it
so
was like,
glad. I was so glad, and it wasn't like, it was this idyllic sort of, what are those like Norman Rockwell kinds of like
mm-hmm.
like lawn, and the sprinklers in the suburbs, and she comes out and she's all healthy and the kid's all healthy, and Homelander's just like the proud father, like, hello son, I'm your dad, and
Yeah.
Billy Butcher's just sitting there like disheveled and homeless looking and just shocked at sort of this like reality that's been created completely under his nose. And it's just, oh God, it was creepy, but so wonderful. And that's where I think the show really truly earns that Watchmen like subversion inflection point, because it did something like that. It's like, oh, you think all of these rules and these storytelling tricks that you've seen now for 10 years and blah blah blah. We're gonna just change all that, and we're gonna comment on the genre and the medium as we do it. And that really settled well with me. That made me immediately go, I can wait for season 2, but god damn it, I'm excited for season 2.
That's funny because I actually had a totally different. I agreed with you all the way up until the last sentence you said, which was, I actually saw it and it was like, it was a twist and a cliffhanger kind of thing, which I appreciated the narrative part of it, but I also felt like, you know what, that could be a wrap on the series and I'm fine.
Ooh, interesting.
like I didn't like almost leaving it with that, and that sort of ambiguity was like, wow, you just fucked over everybody, and it's like, Butcher's like totally messed up now, and if it just didn't come back, I would go, wow, that was awesome. But everything that you were just saying about Watchmen 2 hits me because a lot of the complaints directed at Watchmen at Snyder, and a lot of them are legitimate, but were all the things that he changed from the book, which I felt for the most part, like you and I are sort of, I don't know, I'm becoming actually more sheepish in my apologetics for the Watchmen movie, but I think a lot of it were legitimate changes for the movie storytelling aspect. The giant squid octopus stuff doesn't make any fucking sense to me in the comic, and it would have made even less sense in the movie. But in The Boys, it does sound like, from what I've read about the changes made, that everything was made for the better. And so I'm almost on board with you. Like, it sounds like the book was just a serious fuck you to all superhero books. Like, let's just make this as dark and screwed up. Like, I heard the thing with the Deep and the Dolphin was not what we saw in the show.
No, I've heard the same.
Okay. And by the way, just a short aside, when the news reporter is reporting on that, the chyron below it says the Deep : it wasn't on porpoise. It's like in the background.
Oh, I'm going to watch that now. I didn't even notice that. That's brilliant. Oh my God.
I really felt like whoever made this, sort of recognized the weaknesses of the comic. Granted, that I have not read, but it just sounds like those changes were made for good narrative reasons,
Let's take the look of Huey in the comic. He's basically Jesse Pinkman. And so if look would not have, I mean, the show would have been too dark. Like, you need a sort of wholesome looking guy like Jack Quaid to sort of, only the son of Meg Ryan would be able to see this kind of role of like, he's just this innocent guy. Now he's going to be in this dark world. Like, somebody who looks like Jesse Pinkman is good. You're like, well, clearly this guy's going to be bad. You need that subversion of like, here's this, he was as innocent as Homelander projected. And so to see Huey kind of, go from this sort of like polished, version of what an American boy should be to like this rebellious, subversive, young man who's basically in this punk rock band for all intents and purposes, and they're going around, they're like, to see that play out, and then to see Homelander, it's almost like, man, I never even thought about this until just now. It's almost like you can make an argument that the Huey Homelander characters represent the different arcs that you can take on the political spectrum, to the extreme fringes on both sides. So like Huey's basically joining Antifa. Homelander is part of like this crazy militant, just like, he's uber rich, he's uber in control. He's going to join like the wealthiest of the wealthiest at CPAC and just, like just shit on everybody. Yeah. And it's kind of like, wow, these two guys, suffered somehow in their lives, and this is what it drove them to do, and here's the reasons. And that's interesting. Oof.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up. One of the things I thought was sort of a shortcoming was you could see the look on Huey's face that he, every time he sort of took a step further into his anti-fascist fascism, you could see the the questioning if he was doing the right thing, but I just felt like they didn't explore that enough. I just it's sort of like my critique of, this is a random pull, Jurassic World, which was, I thought not like, one of the things it lacked was the Jeff Goldblum character, like explaining like all the choices you're making are wrong. I wish there had been that moral center, or it not even has to be, it doesn't even have to be a moral center,
but you know what?
Just the sort of, go ahead.
Now that you say that, Pacific Rim totally had that movie. Pacific Rim was a totally bonkers movie, but it had that character. It actually had two of those characters. But the one guy, the British guy, from There's Something About Mary, I believe it's that British. He's like, he's the scientist that's explaining like what we have to do at every point in time. It's like, we can't do that because
yeah.
Just like kind of a Captain Exposition character.
Yeah, that's
interesting.
Yeah, and I think Huey was supposed to pull that off, and to its immense credit, I think the partnership of Huey and Starlight was what made that work. Like, they were sort of together, they were that moral center. But but you're right. Like, Huey, more so than Butcher, is taking this like very conscious path. Well, maybe not more so than Butcher. They're both motivated by the same thing. I think
Butcher's been through this. I'm guessing he went through this very same thing, but he did his water. He's been at this like 3 years now, 4 years, 8 years.
Good point. Yeah.
This is where Huey will be, what Huey will become if he doesn't rationalize his why. Because now Butcher doesn't have a why, so maybe they'll explore that in season 2, which is like, wow, Butcher lost his why, and now, but Huey still has his. So how does that dynamic change?
Yeah. Yeah, boy, they have so much they could dig into.
Okay, so let's jump to the next thing, because like the other thing that really, like, as much as Homelander intrigued me as a character, A-Train completely confused me, and I could not understand why he was so damn pathological in his lying and his denial. Like, he just could not help it. Like, he killed his girlfriend, and yet he's like, he looked at Huey, he's like, you killed my girlfriend. It's like, dude, I don't even know your girlfriend. Like what is going on? Like, it just this idea that he's so messed up, he has to just, I mean, is it that he's taking this crazy steroid, and it's like, and he's just as insecure as you can get, and then he just has to deny? Is that how did you peg him?
I flipped back and forth. It sounds like just like you did, where I thought at one point, like, this is like the literal result of taking too much Compound V or whatever it's called, and it's just messed with his brain. But it's also that justification he needs to like continue thinking that he's actually a hero or something. But I agree with you. Like, it was confusing. I don't think it was. It never pulled me out of it. I never thought that the writing or the acting like wasn't on appropriate for those moments. I just felt like, God, what a weird character. Like, he's back and forth. But also, is that just a trait of his speed? I'm just kind of pulling that out of my ass right now. Like,
I don't know. It's just the fact that his girlfriend was fine. He moved her to Cuba or wherever they went to, and she was in a safe house. Right. Like, she was gonna be okay. Why did he have to kill her? I don't understand. Like, what that was about.
Gotcha. You're even questioning like the act that brought on the pathological line. Yeah.
It's like, but why did he do that? Every decision he makes is just baffling.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely it was strange in this first season, and I'm wondering if this is what, if they've set this up like for later seasons, that several things felt like the heroes were going to get, caught kind of in their act. I mean, there's the Deep getting arrested. There's exactly what you said, like A-Train killing his girlfriend. And then there's freaking, Homelander in the plane, which was just awful. And I kept, I was like, God, somebody's got to be.
Oh, they killed the Invisible guy. The Invisible guy was terrible. They killed him. The only other character we didn't really find out about is that guy who looks like
Noir.
The guy he looks like the G.I. Joe guy, like Snake Eyes.
Like, yeah, he looks like Snake Eyes.
We never heard anything about. We don't know what his deal is, and we don't know what Arclight who Sunfire
Lamplighter.
Lamplight. Whatever happened to? We never knew what his deal. He just left. We don't know why. We don't know.
Well, we hear he killed someone, I think, right? Or there was like a terrible incident where he kills many people, I think.
I forgot all about that.
I think it's just sort of stated. It's I don't remember. It's sort of like, well, after the Lamplighter accident, or something like that.
This brings me to another question, because the other amazing little Easter egg for season 2 that they set up at the end, in the final episode, was the reveal of Madeline's boss. I keep calling her Elizabeth Shue because why not? Madeline's boss, who I always thought they did a great job of making Madeline seem like, oh, she's in control, she's the top of the food chain. And then they every once in a while will kind of glance at her, the guy who runs the conglomerate, essentially. The way I understood it is that she is CEO of Vought, but there's like Vaught's part of like some kind of weird conglomerate that there's another guy higher than her. That's how I was, or maybe he's like the chairman of the board or something. I don't know. But they did a great job making her seem like she was in charge, and then they glimpsed this other guy, and who should happen to play this character but freaking Giancarlo Esposito, Gus Fring himself. And I'm just like, oh my God, I love now there's no excuse. Like I have to, not that I wasn't gonna not watch it, but I'm like, now I have to. Like the freaking Gus Fring is now the big bad of season 2. I say all this because they never explain Lamplighter, and I'm wondering if there's not some kind of connection between those two characters, because they were sort of very just briefly touched on but not really delved into.
Interesting. Yeah, it's sort of that thing of like, I'm just walking the line of like, do I want to read it? Do I want to, but I just sort of like the freshness of the show. Like especially having gone through what we just went through with Game of Thrones, I do not want my brain to start doing that. Like, well, it wasn't like that in the comics.
Oh, I am reading this. They're saying, remember that character Mallory that Butcher goes to see, and she's like, not going to help you. And he's like, come on. She's like, all right, but don't you come back here again. It says the Lamplighter is one of the original members of the Seven. After he killed Mallory's grandchildren, he was given up by the rest of his team to prevent a full-scale war between the Seven and the CIA.
Okay.
So that's how it's in the comics. That's how it's presented. So maybe we find out that's somehow connected. We never really found out what Mallory's deal was, or who she's rebelling against, or why, or any of that. So maybe more to come.
And like, I mean, maybe that is sort of the that's the main issue of season 2 is uncovering all that dark shit that the superheroes have been into in a public way. You've definitely talked about your anticipation of season 2. Do we know any dates on that or anything?
No, but they're filming it now.
Okay.
And it's going to be, and Seth Rogen said they'll have more money, and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't feel like this season had little money. They did a great job with their budget.
I totally agree.
There's not a lot of holes in that. I mean, they may have used some locations multiple times, but that didn't feel like a limitation. It was just like, that's just where they would be. No, I would love to see what this show does with more money. I can only imagine, delving into clearly these 7 people aren't the only people who have powers. There's all these like B and C level people. I'm almost waiting for like kind of in the movie Looper, where like the most anybody can do is just sort of move coins around with their fingers until the little kid is born. Like I'm almost wondering if like is there like a superpower person that just can move paper clips around and that's it. It's just like a novelty. It's like
Well, I think so, because I think when Madeline's doing her presentation, she talks about the Vought company now represents like 1,400 heroes and whatever. It's like the 7 are just the top.
Oh, that's right.
It's like she shows that map of the U.S.
And that's where the Deep gets franchised out, like down to this like tiny town. It's like now there's not even water there.
Yeah.
That was interesting to see him go through all that. What do you think? Well, I'm just sort of free thinking here. What do you think Maeve's deal is? Because she seems to be the only one who has admittedly compromised her ideals, but she doesn't seem to be as overtly shitty as the rest of them.
Um, yeah, I wonder if she, is it turns kind of thing. But
Mm.
the you just know, like, just the way she handled the plane accident, like, or not accident, the almost deliberate downing of that plane that Homelander did, that, she's on board. Like,
Mm.
she may not like it, but she's probably seen other shit like that and not
Yeah.
said anything.
No.
And so, but maybe she is the whistleblower eventually. I mean, I'm curious about that. It's never going to have like a happy ending, but
No.
I feel like it's got to have some light or some exposure to the wrongdoings of these heroes, because otherwise it's just, I mean, there's no end to that dark, those depths that they can go.
What do you
So
think
I
happens? What do you think happens to Billy Butcher? What do you think? Does he?
Oh,
Is
what
there
will
any
happen
way?
now?
Is there any way he forgives his wife for any of this?
It's certainly like a real head fuck, but he he's absolutely right in going after the seven.
Yeah.
He's just wrong in like his uh, myopic vengeance pursuit,
Yeah.
Um,
No.
and the introduction of Mallory, makes us think like, oh, well, there was some organization opposing this that he's obviously worked with people on the inside, and it's like I'm just sort of curious how all those parts fit together, but you know, um, I guess we'll find out next year.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming this will be coming sooner than later. Probably, I would guess maybe May.
Oh, yeah, that'd be interesting. Oh, and I know, as we're sort of free associating, one of the things we go back to pretty frequently is like when we kicked off this podcast, it was me ranting about the Avengers. And I think one of the things that drew me into this was I was like, see, that's what I was telling you about the
Uh,
Avengers.
yeah.
And see, and I really liked the way that the economics were solved in The Boys, because in the Avengers, you're left going like, wait, is the government like that's the whole reason, one of the many reasons why Civil War doesn't work for me is like, well, is the government already paying you to be the Avengers? Then
Yeah.
yeah, they get to license you, you know? Like, but if Stark is paying for it, then the Sokovia Accords don't make any sense. Like they shouldn't be accords. It should be a law or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm getting too wonky about that stuff, but it's um, with Winter Soldier, it's clear that like Shield is corrupt,
Yeah.
and therefore like the heroes are corrupt by association, kind of thing. Their work is corrupt, and the Boys just kind of like cuts all that out and it's like, yeah, this is exactly how it would go down. Like it is corrupt. It's a corporation running this. They figure out how to manipulate like their customers and their product, and how to sell it to the government, and that's how it
Well,
works.
they have all the movies planned out, and like so
Yes.
it's like Marvel if Tony Stark was a real guy. That's kind of like if we
Yeah.
do the same movies and stuff, but it's like it's not Robert Downey Jr. It's a guy named Tony Stark, and he's starring in this movie. It's like, oh,
Right.
As you were saying that, I was thinking back. There will always be a place in my heart for the Watchmen movie because it was the thing. It was the catalyst that kind of led me back into comics and graphic novels in a big bad way. Like it was sort of it set all this in motion essentially. But I'll always defend it as like, oh no, it gets 80% of it right. And we can bicker about the 20% very passionately, and some of it I'm even kind of coming around on the squid, because once you understand its context in the comics a little bit better, like, oh, still wouldn't have pulled off in the movies at all, but it's like, I get why people would be mad about that. The thing that I do sort of find myself more and more disagreeing with is in the movie, they really downplay the fact that Adrian Veidt is this amazing genius who, basically use this. It's like a Bradley Cooper in Limitless. Basically, that is who Adrian Veidt is, right? And so it's like they kind of have this throwaway line where they're like, Mr. Veidt, you've leveraged your Ozymandias character into $1 billion enterprise, like he's goddamn Walt Disney. I'm like, there's no way Ozymandias the character would do all of this. And so it just kind of made him seem like a Batman villain, like, you're the toy maker and you've made this multi-million-dollar empire. And so it's like that. If it was presented more like Vought, which is interesting because it's Adrian Veidt, and that's his company's called
Yeah,
Veidt.
I actually wondered if that was a dig at them.
I think it's, or not a dig, maybe so much
or reference.
A nice little homage. Like, hey man, we're like you. We're trying to be subversive too. So yeah, I like that. It's interesting because it adds a layer to it where you're like, oh, you have to kind of always think about that. Like, there's corporate responsibility here. Like, you can't just sort of hand wave that away. Like when there's an invisible man walking around, like, watching women pee, that's a problem. You can't, there's somebody's responsible for that. Like, somebody should go to jail because that guy is allowed to do that. So it's like, it just adds like an extra level of kind of like the algorithm in your head is kind of analyzing all that as the show goes on, which is not something I'm used to. It's like you kind of just, hand waving it all away, which I like your point though. That's what kicked us all off on the Avengers anyway. It's like, how are they affording all this? How is this happening?
Well, yeah. And like, and how are they not corrupt? I mean, like when Ultron gets released upon Sokovia, it's like, I don't know, either the Sokovia Accords didn't go far enough, or or they never should have happened. It's just so weird. But I would say that's as good a place as any to wrap up and and talk about what we normally talk about, is comic books, and where can people find us and get more about comic books if they want to dig into our archives.
Well, we are the show about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf, and you can find a bunch of those picks and more on our Instagram feed, which is at panelism.inc. That's panelism.ink. Yes, it's all one username, and that's actually our URL as well. If you just type in www.panelism.ink, you'll find our past shows and other stuff, and then subscribe, tell your friends. If you like the show, suggest it. You give us feedback anywhere you're subscribing if it's possible, but that's always helpful. Give us a shout out on Instagram. However you want to get in touch. Get in touch. Let us know what you think, and if there's any books or if you're a creator and you want to be talked to, I think I'll tell you this sort of offline topic. There's a great little comic store in Buena Vista that I went to a week ago. Just a killer little store, and there's a guy who works there who's a local creator who has a really special piece that I think we should talk about.
Very cool.
On another episode. So that's coming maybe at some point. But yeah, all of that stuff. Subscribe, share, tell your friends, and we will see you next week.